Hello, my name is Mark Aniello, Operations Manager for ECR, Environmental Compliance and Remediation. Today's instructional video will deal with the Hazardous Material Compliance Plan and other worker safety programs at your facility. Every employer is required by law to provide a safe and healthful workplace for his or her employees. Our first program that we will be dealing with today will be called our Accident Prevention, or sometimes referred to as our Injury and Illness Prevention Program. Our written accident prevention program implemented at this facility has the following elements: management commitment and assignment of responsibilities, safety communications system with the employees, system for assuring employee compliance with safe work practices, scheduled inspections and evaluation systems, accident investigations, procedures for correcting unsafe and unhealthy conditions, safety and health training and instruction, and finally, record keeping and documentation. The first element of our Injury and Illness Accident Prevention Program is the management's commitment and assignment of responsibilities. The management's commitment to the implementation of this program is demonstrated by the personal concern for the employee's safety and health in the workplace. In order to maximize production and quality of our products and services, it's necessary to control potential workplace hazards and correct them as they occur or as they are recognized. This includes emphasis on employee safety by the management staff and encouraging employees to report unsafe work conditions. There must be cooperation between management and employees at the facility in order to have an effective safety program. This may be accomplished through safety committees or regular employee management meetings. This leads us into our second element of our program, safety communication. The purpose of safety communication in the workplace is to encourage employees to inform the employer of hazards at the worksite without fear of reprisal. This may be accomplished at your facility through employee representatives on the safety committee or through other means. Ask your manager if your facility has established a safety committee or other employee communication meetings. The general discussions at the meetings will concentrate on recent accident and injury investigations in the workplace and how to prevent them from reoccurring. Also, reviews of periodic scheduled worksite inspections are helpful in identifying potential problem areas in the workplace, which may include exposure to hazardous substances, poor housekeeping, or potential regulator agency violations. Suggestions from the employees are not only helpful, but they are encouraged by the management of your facility. The establishment of effective code of safe practices will also help to outline the safety effort at your facility. You will be given a copy during your orientation, so be sure to read it, as you will be expected to follow all the rules and regulations as it pertains to your job. Make sure you observe all posted warnings at your facility. This is an effective way to identify potential workplace hazards. Another element of your program will deal with the hazard assessment and control. The purpose of this portion of your program is to identify existing or potential hazards in the workplace and eliminating them or controlling them. This will be accomplished by establishing an effective hazard control system. Your facility has established an effective work system program monitoring workplace control conditions through scheduled and documented facility self-inspections. These inspections are conducted by personnel who are experienced in identifying actual or potential workplace hazards and also understand safe work practices. The review of the self-inspections will help to prioritize actions needed to be taken to correct any problems at your facility. Again, your employer will encourage you to tell your supervisor about any possible hazardous situations in your workplace. The facility will document and report and record how and when the hazard was corrected. The program will monitor the operation of workplace equipment and also verify that the routine preventative maintenance is conducted. This will include ensuring that personal protective equipment is reliable and available to the employees. The hazards will be corrected as soon as they are identified. For any hazards that cannot be immediately corrected, the management will set a target date for the correction and provide interim protection to the employees to prevent injury or exposure. Again, the employees are encouraged to tell their supervisors of possible hazardous situations, knowing that their reports will be given prompt and serious attention without fear of reprisal. One of the other elements of our program is what we would call the accident investigation. Should an accident occur at your facility, there will be an investigation in order to identify and recognize the areas responsible for the accident. The investigation will be in writing and identify the causes of the accident or near-miss type of occurrences. It will describe what took place that caused that situation to occur in the first place, and whether it was an injury to an employee, an incident that has caused a production delay, or any other conditions recognized as having a potential for losses or delays. It's important to identify whether or not an employee was qualified to perform the function involved in the accident or near miss. Ensuring that employees are properly trained and proper operation procedures established for the tasks are involved. The purpose of the investigation is not to establish blame, but to determine what type of constructive action can be taken to eliminate the cause of the accident or potential near-miss accident. Corrective action will only identify how well to prevent a reoccurrence of the accident and near-miss, but also how to improve the overall operation. The solution should be a means of achieving not only accident control, but also total operation control. If your facility has a safety and health committee, it will review the investigation of all accidents to assist in recommending appropriate corrective action and to prevent a similar reoccurrence. The next element of our safety program deals with the safety planning, rules, and work procedures. Planning for safety and health is an important part of every business decision, including purchasing, engineering, changes in work processes, and planning for emergencies. Your safety program has written procedures and rules which apply to everyone at the facility and address such areas as personal protective equipment, appropriate clothing, and expected behavior, also dealing with emergency procedures. You will receive a copy of your Code of Safe Practices upon your initial hiring orientation. This will help to ensure employee compliance with safety rules and procedures. There is also a written plan that will deal with your emergency situations, such as fire, evacuation, chemical spills, and potential medical emergencies. If your job operation involves hazardous substances, procedures or processes, you will be specifically trained and equipped to handle possible imminent hazards and dangers. The next element of our accident prevention program deals with safety and health training. Training is the most important element of any injury and illness prevention program. The employer will benefit from safe and health training through fewer work-related injuries and illnesses, reduced stress, and worry caused by exposure to the hazards in the workplace. This will translate into increased productivity and a more cohesive and dependable workforce. Your training program will be established to maintain a safe and healthful workplace. It will help you to identify the workplace hazards and establish practices for controlling exposures to these hazards. It is important to be knowledgeable about the materials and equipment you are working with, what hazards are present, and how they need to be controlled. No employee is expected to undertake a job until he or she has received instructions on how to do it properly and safely, and should never undertake a job until he or she has received proper training instructions how to do it safely, and should never undertake a job that appears to be unsafe in the first place. Personal protective equipment must be used when and where required and properly maintained by that employee. There will be regular safety training meetings to develop a competent and safe workforce. Safety and health at your facility must be part of every operation. Without question, It is every employee's responsibility. And the objective of our safety and health program is to reduce the number of injuries and illnesses that may occur in your facility. Try to be cooperative in all safety and health matters, not only between supervisors and employees, but between each other. Only through a cooperative effort can a safe program in the best interest of all of the people at your facility be established and preserved. We'll be back in a moment to discuss our next program, the Hazardous Communication Standard. The next program we're going to talk about is our Hazardous Communication Standard. In the workplace, you are potentially exposed to one or more chemical hazards. This poses a serious problem for exposed workers and their employers. Chemical exposure may cause or contribute to many serious health effects such as hearing ailments, kidney and lung damage, sterility, burns, rashes, and even in extreme cases, cancer. Some chemicals may also be safety hazards and cause potential problems like fire and explosions and other serious types of accidents. Because of the seriousness of these safety and health hazards, your employer is required to take steps to protect against the dangers of hazardous chemicals. The Occupational and Safety and Health Administration issued in 1983 a rule called Hazardous Communication Standard. This standard states that you have a right to know what hazards you face on the job and how to protect yourself against them. This can be accomplished through safety training and proper handling and storage of chemicals. Chemical manufacturers and importers must convey the hazard information to the end user of the products by means of labels on the containers and material safety data sheets, sometimes called MSDSs. The Hazardous Communication Standard ensures that your employer receives the information they need to train and inform you properly and to develop employee protection programs. How to comply with the standard. This facility will comply with the standard by developing a written hazardous communication program. The program applies to all work operations in your company where you may be exposed to hazardous substances under normal working conditions or during an emergency situation. You will be able to obtain information about this program by contacting the safety manager or your emergency coordinator of this facility. The intent of the standard is to inform you of the hazardous properties of the chemicals with which you work, safe handling procedures, and measures to take to protect yourself from these chemicals. You will also be informed of hazards associated with non-routine tasks to ensure you have the proper training to handle the chemical hazardous situation in a safe manner. One of the components of the Hazardous Communication Standard is to make a list of all hazardous chemicals in the facility. The inventory list of the chemicals can be found in the Hazardous Material Compliance-based binder located in the Safety Manager's office or in other designated areas of your facility. Each chemical hazard found on this list has a corresponding MSDS, or Material Safety Data Sheet. This is located in a binder or file. Your employer will show you the location of this file during your initial hiring orientation. The MSDS is the second component of the Hazardous Communication Standard and will provide you with specific information as it pertains to the hazardous chemicals. We will discuss the Material Safety Data Sheet later in the video. How do we know if something is hazardous? The label will classify chemical hazards according to one or more of the following characteristics: ignitability, corrosivity, reactivity, or toxicity. The ignitability is one of the most common of the hazard classes. This material can be a gas, a liquid, or a solid. These materials should be handled with care because of their flammable or combustible nature. Controlling possible sources of ignition is necessary to avoid potential fire or explosion. A second characteristic which can identify a material as hazardous is corrosivity. There are two types of corrosives that can be handled in the workplace. These are corrosive acids and corrosive bases. The corrosive bases are sometimes referred to as caustics or alkalines. These materials upon contact will cause immediate and sometimes permanent damage to the skin or the eyes. It is important to always use proper personal protective gear in order to reduce harmful exposure to this class of chemicals. These materials will generate heat due to chemical reactions and should be stored separately to avoid contact with chemicals which are not compatible. Remember, this class of chemicals will also corrode steel. Reactivity is also a characteristic which would identify a material as hazardous. This class of materials are normally unstable and readily undergo a violent change. Toxic gases, vapors, or fumes can be generated when mixed with water. Special care must be taken when handling these materials. Catalyzed materials such as epoxy paints and glues can be considered reactive and may release toxic gases as part of their hardening process. The final characteristics which identify a material as being hazardous is its toxicity. This is when a chemical poses a hazard to the human health or environment because of its carcinogenicity, or something that may cause cancer. This class of chemicals may have acute, which is immediate toxic effects, or in some cases be delayed, or which we would call chronic effects. These materials may be bioaccumulative, properties which cause the product to accumulate in your system, and or may be even persistent in the environment. It is important to understand the toxicity of a product and how to handle it properly. Every container of hazardous chemicals is labeled by the manufacturer. The actual format will differ from company to company, but the labels must contain similar information. This makes it easy to determine the chemicals possible, the hazardous parts of that chemical, and steps you must take to protect yourself against those risks. The label should contain name of the chemical. It should include the name and address and emergency phone number of the company that made the product or the company that imported the chemical. It is important to read the hazard warning every time you handle a container of a hazardous material. Special signal words are used to tell you how dangerous the chemicals can be. The words caution, warning, or danger will indicate an increasing order of seriousness of the chemical hazard that you're handling. Precautionary statements on the label will give information on how to handle properly. Information on health and physical hazards associated with that product, first aid instructions, and what to do in case of accidental exposure will also be found on the label. Always read the label before you start a job and use the information to work with the chemicals safely. If the container labels are missing, damaged, or difficult to read, notify your supervisor immediately. If your facility is buying chemicals in bulk and you're transferring those materials into secondary containers, it's important that you label those containers properly, putting the name of the product on that container and something about its hazard. One of the systems that we use to identify the different types of hazards is a colored and number-coded label system developed by the National Fire Protection Association. It's also useful in obtaining quick information about the hazards associated with the chemicals in the workplace. The colors represent the kind of hazard the chemical has. The blue is associated with the health hazard, the red with its flammability characteristics, and the yellow dealing with the chemicals, reactivity. The white diamond is key to specific hazards such as corrosives, acids, or oxidizer on the NFAP label, or information on specific personal protective gear on the colored bar type label. Hazard warning information such as target organ effects by the chemical will usually be shown. The numbers in the colored bar or diamond areas show the degree of hazard, with 0 representing a minimal hazard and increasing to the highest action level of 4, which indicates a severe hazard. The labeling system quickly identifies the hazards associated with a particular chemical and informs the worker on how it should be handled. A lot of valuable information can be found on the label, but if you don't find everything you need, refer to the Material Safety Data Sheet or the MSDS for more information. The Material Safety Data Sheet is a detailed information bulletin prepared by the manufacturer or importer of a chemical that describes the physical and chemical properties, physical and health hazards associated with that chemical, routes of exposure, entry into the system, precautions for safe handling, use in emergency first aid procedures, control measures. Information on the material safety data sheet aids in the selection of safe products and to help prepare the employees and employers to respond effectively to daily exposure situations as well as to emergency situations. The MSDSs are a comprehensive source of information for all types of employers. There may be information on the MSDS that is not useful to you or your particular operation. Concentrate on the information that is applicable to your situation. Generally, hazard information and protective measures should be the focus of concern. Your employer maintains a complete and accurate MSDS file for each hazardous chemical that is at your facility. The manufacturer or distributor of the chemical will supply the MSDS to the employer. If you have trouble locating a particular data sheet, please notify your supervisor. They can assist you in obtaining the proper information. OSHA specifies the information to be included on an MSDS, but the format can vary from data sheet to data sheet. The MSDS must be in English and contain at least all the following information. Section 1 will have the chemical identity. This section will identify the manufacturer and their address. Also, it will contain emergency and technical phone numbers. The chemical and common name of that product will also be provided in this section. You also may be able to find cross-references on the label. Section 2 will deal with the hazardous ingredients. If the chemical is a mixture and the chemical has common names, all of these will be included in this section. It will determine what the health hazards will be and how they're listed. Worker exposure limits to the chemicals, such as OSHA permissible exposure limits, or PELs, will also be included in this section. The only time you will find the identity of a chemical is when it is a trade secret. But the MSDS will still tell you about its hazards and the safety measures that are required. Section 3 will review the physical and chemical characteristics. These include such items as boiling and freezing points, density of that product, vapor pressures, specific gravity, solubility of the products, and the product's general appearance and odor. These characteristics provide important information for designing safe and healthful work practices. Your Section 4 of your material safety data sheet will deal with the fire and explosion hazard data. In this section, the chemical's potential for fire and explosion will be described. Also, the fire hazards of the chemicals and the conditions under which it could ignite or explode will be identified. Types of firefighting equipment or extinguishing agents or firefighting methods will be described in this section. The next section, or Section 5, will prevent information about the reactivity. This will include information about other chemicals and substances which the chemical is incompatible or which may react with. This section may include information on hazardous decomposition or polymerization byproducts. Section 6 is an important section in this material safety data sheet. It deals with the health hazards. The acute or immediate and chronic or delayed health hazards, together with signs and symptoms of exposure, will be found in this section. In addition, any medical conditions that are aggravated by exposure to this compound must be included in this section. The specific types of chemical health hazards, such as carcinogens, corrosives, toxins, irritants, and the effects on target organs like the liver, the kidney, and central nervous system, will be described in this section. Also, useful information of primary routes of entry will be described by pathways in which the chemical enters into the body. Emergency and first aid procedures should be an accident or exposure of this material occur will be described. The health hazard information will lead us into Section 7. This will give us instructions on precautions for safe handling and use of the chemical. This section included recommended industrial hygiene practices, precautions to be taken during handling, storage, and use procedures, and needed information for cleaning up spills or possible leaks. There may be additional information on disposal requirements and other types of situations occurring. Section 8 will explain control measures to reduce harmful exposure. This will include engineering controls, safe handling procedures, and personal protective equipment. Information is often included on the use of eye protection, protective clothing, gloves, and respirators. The material safety data sheet gives you everything you need to know to work safely with chemicals. You may find data sheets differ from manufacturer to manufacturer in appearance, but the information on the sheet will tell you all you need to know about the chemical, its hazards, and procedures for handling to avoid injury and illness. Read the MSDS before you start a job. That way you'll be prepared. If you have any questions about material safety data sheets or hazardous communication standard in general, your supervisor will be available to help you. Your company has given information to protect you, but the only person you can keep safe every day on the job is you. Follow some common sense rules as part of your job. Identify hazards before you start a job. Respect all precautions. Don't take chances. Read all labels and material safety data sheets. Follow warnings and instructions. Use the proper protective equipment when handling hazardous chemicals. Practice safe and sensible work procedures. Remember, it is your right to know what hazard you face on the job and how to protect yourself against them. We'll be back in a few moments to discuss our next program, Emergency Response Procedures. Our final program today, the Emergency Response Program, sometimes referred to as Community Right to Know laws, will be discussed. In 1984, there was a toxic gas disaster in Bhopal, India, that resulted in 7,000 fatalities and over 100,000 injuries. As a result of this mishap, there was worldwide attention to facilities which handled hazardous materials and chemicals. In the United States, the federal, state, and local governments responded with several regulations and laws to improve accident prevention and emergency response planning activities at chemical handling facilities. Since the facility you work at handles hazardous materials, we are required to have an emergency response plan. Usually a local agency like the fire department will be responsible for administering this program. Let's discuss the different elements of your program. At the facility, there are individuals responsible for coordination of emergency situations. These emergency coordinators will act as a liaison between your facility and the emergency personnel, like the fire or police departments. Talk to your supervisor to determine who is your emergency coordinator. There are several elements of the emergency response plan. Number one, procedures for internal alarms and facility personnel notifications of the emergency. Number two, the evacuation and re-entry procedures. Number three, procedures for responding to fire or explosion involving hazardous materials. Number four, the emergency response equipment. Number five, procedures for responding to an earthquake. Number six, procedures for responding to a chemical spill and/or material release. Number seven, operational shutdown procedures. Let's discuss the different elements of the emergency response plan at our facility. The first element of our program deals with our internal alarm system. Although your facility may have a sound alarm, we will always default to a verbal alarm system. This will include notifying the occupants of the facility of the nature of the emergency and instructions for response. The emergency coordinator should be notified of the situation immediately to determine the extent of the emergency. This may require contacting outside emergency responders, like the fire department. If at any time you feel that the situation requires outside assistance, dial 911. The second element of the program is the evacuation and re-entry procedures. If the emergency requires the evacuation of the building, you will need to leave the facility through the designated emergency exits. Assist anyone having difficulty leaving the facility area and anyone who may be injured. It is important to move quickly but calmly. You must go to the prearranged location outside the building designated as the evacuation staging area on the facility map. Talk to your supervisor to the exact location at your facility. It is extremely important that you go to this location because this is where your emergency coordinator will be accounting for all the facility personnel. This information is relayed to the emergency response personnel. If the emergency is a fire, you will need to follow the procedures for responding to a fire and explosion involving hazardous materials. All fires or explosions, regardless of sizes, must be reported to the emergency coordinator. In order for a fire and explosion to occur, certain conditions must be present. These are the 4 elements of a fire. The first element is the fuel. This can be any flammable or combustible material, which may be a solid, a liquid, or a gas. The second element is the air or oxygen. The air we breathe is approximately 21% oxygen. All a fire needs is 16% oxygen to ignite. The third element is a source of ignition. This can be a spark, heat, open flame. If the fuel generates sufficient vapors, ignition can occur. The fourth element is a combination of the first 3 elements. When the air, the fuel, and the source of ignition comes together in the right amounts, a chemical chain reaction happens and a fire occurs. If we remove any one of these conditions, the fire cannot exist. Fires are classified according to the types of materials burning. This is important when we are choosing the fire extinguisher. You should be familiar with the type of extinguisher used at your facility. There are 4 classifications of fires, and they are designated by a letter designation or a symbol. One of the newer extinguishers that may be at your facility will also use the NFPA or National Fire Protection Association identification picture. If you cannot find the identification on the extinguisher, look for the Underwriters Laboratories label. It will designate the classification. The classification system is easy to understand. Class A is designated by the letter A or by the triangle symbol. This class of fire is a combustible material, such as trash wood paper, rubber, and many plastics. The Class B is designated by the letter B or the square symbol. This includes flammable or combustible liquids, oils, grease, paints, and flammable gases. Class C is designated by the letter C or the circle symbol. This type of fire involves energized electrical equipment, where the electrical non-conductivity of the extinguishing media is extremely important. The Class D is designated by the letter D or the star. There is no NFPA picture associated with this class. This fire is associated with combustible metals such as magnesium, titanium, zirconium, sodium, lithium, and potassium. Each fire extinguisher will display the rating on the faceplate. Some extinguishers will be marked with multiple ratings. The most common extinguisher used at the facilities is what we call the multi-class dry chemical, which is rated for A, B, and C class fires, or a combination of classes. Many fires are small at origin and may be extinguished by use of proper portable fire extinguishers. It is strongly recommended that the fire department be notified as soon as the fire is discovered. The most important principle is to remember is personal safety first. If you do decide to use an extinguisher, you will need to follow the following proper procedures. First, pull the ring pin. This will release the trigger lever and allow actuation of the extinguisher. Stand back between 8 and 12 feet and aim the extinguisher at the base of the fire. Squeeze the trigger lever while holding the extinguisher upright. Sweep the extinguisher from side to side, covering the area of the fire with the extinguishing agent. Remember, only using a fire extinguisher when it is safe to do so. The smoke from many common materials is extremely toxic. Make sure you always have a clear escape route. Another element of the emergency response plan is the emergency response equipment. This may include hazardous material spill kits, first aid kits, eye wash stations, and your fire extinguishers. Make yourself familiar with the location of this equipment. Ask your supervisor if you need help. An important element of the emergency response plan, particular to this part of the country, is earthquake response. A damaging earthquake can occur virtually anywhere in the state. There are a few things to remember during an earthquake to reduce injuries. First and foremost, stay calm. Think through the consequences of any action you take. If you are inside, stay inside. If you are outdoors, stay there. In earthquakes, most injuries occur as people are entering or leaving the building. If outdoors, move away from the building and utility wires. The greatest danger from falling debris is just outside the doorways and close to the outer walls. Once in the open, stay there until shaking stops. If indoors, take cover under a desk, table, or bench. Alongside a load-bearing wall or supported doorway can also afford excellent protection. Stay away from glass windows like showroom areas. Do not use open flames like candles or matches. There may be gas leaks. In short, when an earthquake strikes, duck, cover, and hold. Duck or drop down to the floor. Take cover under a sturdy desk or table. Seek cover against an interior wall and protect your hand and neck with your arms. Avoid the danger spots near windows, hanging objects, mirrors, or tall furniture. If you take cover under a piece of furniture, hold on to it and be prepared to move with it. Hold the position until the ground stops shaking. After the earthquake, be prepared for additional earthquake aftershocks. Although most of these smaller shocks do come after the main shock, there may be some large enough to cause additional damage. When possible, go to the designated staging area. You may be asked to help with emergencies like employee injuries and damaged utilities. Do not touch down power lines or objects in contact with down power lines. Stay away from damaged areas. The final element of the emergency response plan is the procedures to responding to a chemical spill and hazardous material releases. This includes operational shutdown procedures. If you discover a spill or material release, report the incident immediately to your emergency coordinator. The initial response to any emergency spill will be to protect human health and safety, and then the environment. Identification, containment, treatment, and disposal assessment will be secondary to your response. This may require referral to material safety data sheets to employ proper response. The operational shutdown procedures are used to prevent exposure to all employees. If you are involved in the cleanup of a spill, make sure that all unnecessary personnel are removed from the hazard area. This may require an announcement to the rest of the facility. Put on your protective equipment specified in the data sheets. If a flammable material is involved, remove all ignition sources. This may include requirement for spark and explosion-proof cleanup equipment also. If possible, try to stop the leak. Use inert absorbent material, contain the cleanup material, and then clean up the spill. Divert away from surface waters and sewers. If the spill is held by secondary containment, it may be pumped back into the appropriate storage drum. Place all containment materials and wastes in drums for removal. Remember, if it's a hazardous material, it becomes a hazardous waste and must be disposed of by the proper hazardous waste hauler. If you cannot dispose of it in a regular garbage bin or dumpster, make sure you do talk to your supervisor for proper disposal. If so, if you do see a spill, it becomes your responsibility to report it. If you have any question about your emergency response procedures, please discuss it with your supervisor, or you can call ECR at 1-800-800-7644. It is important that you understand what to do during an emergency.